still technically 12 of them in this contest. Danny, how many do you think will be left by the end of the week?
Probably 3, maybe 4. I think in the end it's going to the leader is either going to be Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss, or Rishi Sunak.
What do you think, David?
How can I possibly gainsay that? I mean, the electorate we're talking about is Tory MPs first and then Tory party members second. I don't understand Tory MPs, and I certainly don't understand the current Tory party membership in the country. So only an idiot would not defer to what Daniel Finkelstein just said. I mean, he knows what he's talking about, and I really, really don't. All I can say is, in many ways, I don't particularly care anymore.
Right, explain that. Why don't you care who the Prime Minister is?
Because I think that the Conservative Party by 2024 will have been in power for 14 years, and whichever one of them wins, I think they need to lose power. Now, you may then say to me, well, which of them do I think is most likely to win the Conservatives' power? To which the answer is, I really honestly don't know, because they all face exactly the same problems as Boris Johnson did, except with theoretically none of his flaws. But then, of course, they won't have his advantages of extraordinary personability, which we've all been told about over all this time either. And they still will have been in power for 14 years, and the record that they have presided over is not going to look that brilliant, is it, by 2024? So that's really, I think some of us really have to stand slightly, not above the fray, but to the side of the fray and say, well, where's the country in all this?
I think it's an appropriate position, actually, David, you're taking, because one of the things I've noticed is people sort of, and they did this with Rory Stewart as well when he was running for the leadership. He wasn't going to win the leadership. He didn't understand where the centre of gravity was in the Conservative Party. And it was quite appropriate for people to say the centre of gravity in the Conservative Party isn't their centre of gravity, and to therefore say none of them will suit me. But what's a mistake is to kind of project one's own out external to the Conservative body view as to who's likely to win based on one's own, So There are a lot of people who think Jeremy Hunt's going to win because they would personally prefer Jeremy Hunt to win, but that doesn't actually mean he's really that viable a candidate.
Exactly. So,
yeah, as you know, David, I have sort of particular take on where the Conservative body's been, and I'm certainly a liberal Conservative and nearer the centre than many Conservatives, and I've got to adjust for that as well in trying to make a judgment so that I don't, so that my predictions are not overwhelmed by where my politics are.
So,
yeah, but as you know, the critical question now in deciding which candidate you're going to support, as far as I can tell, is whether or not you think It Ain't Half Hot Mum was racist. So where do you stand on that, Danny?
I do. I saw that row.
I completely missed that row. What was the 8 half?
I think Charles Moore, is that where it's come from? But I actually, fun enough, was reading Penny Mordaunt's book over the weekend, and it came up, and I read that she writes with a co-author, and I think he's clearly written the cultural side of it. So the interesting thing about her book is it's relentlessly modernising text, and quite one of the things that's interesting about the Tory leadership election is that the 3 leading candidates don't come from the traditional positions on the right, and probably the ones that do, Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, for example, are not going to do all that well. The right's going to have to congregate behind another candidate, and Liz Truss is going to be that person because of where she's positioning herself, not as opposed to I think what her fundamental politics are. Although obviously at a certain point it becomes hard to tell the difference if you strike a pose, that ends up being who you are. But Penny Mordaunt, I think if she does make the last 2, which is certainly not impossible, it'll become obvious that she isn't the right-wing candidate. And that's obvious from reading her book. This sort of throwaway line about It Ain't Half Hot Mum, with which I do strongly agree with her, will become a problem with more traditionalist people who can't see she's right.
Which is her, I think it was a full house bingo card of casual racism, was the phrase that she used.
Who can disagree with that? It surely is.
Yeah, that does seem to be fair. So just to bring you some breaking news, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries have just come out of number 10 and backed Liz Truss to become the next Prime Minister. And then afterwards, Jacob Rees-Mogg has walked off and Nadine has gone back into number 10. So we'll bring you a clip of that in just a moment. Danny, it's interesting the point you were just making about Liz Truss and her politics, because it is extraordinary. But it was being told that she's going to be the candidate of the right. The former Lib Dem, Republican, Cameroon Remainer Liz Truss is now the flag bearer for the Tory right.
If you want one of the best speeches against Brexit, look up Liz Truss's speech at the Food and Drinks Federation during the referendum campaign. I was actually there, and those people who are used to the fact that Liz Truss doesn't speak very well when speaking from a script, and some of them have been a disaster, will be surprised at how effective the speech is. But the content's pretty striking. It is, as good a case against Brexit and why it wouldn't work as I've seen. Right now, I don't. That's not a gotcha because we decided to leave, and she's trying to adapt to that. That's not a gotcha, but it is a description of her politics. Look at one of the most enthusiastic people about Liz Truss as a minister. You'll find it was George Osborne. That does it. I understand why Liz Truss is appealing to those people. There are two reasons. One is a genuine strand of her politics. She's always been very economically liberal in a way that I sometimes think is unrealistic. And the other is, I'm afraid, a bit of a pose, right? She has sort of positioned herself so as to try, after the Brexit referendum, as sort of more royalist than the king, and in order to overcome politically the disadvantage she felt she faced for having supported Remain. But whether that's a genuine strand of her politics, it certainly. When I spoke to her when she was Justice Secretary, she told me how much she admired Roy Jenkins. That is a strand of her policy. I like that. I think it's appropriate to be admiring of some of his liberal reforms, not of everything that he stood for, but his liberal reforms. And but it's not where I think she'd want to be considered now.
I think we can now take a listen to that endorsement. It was pretty extraordinary doing the endorsement with the number 10 door behind you. But anyway, this is Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries speaking outside number 10 in the last couple of minutes.
Always opposed to Rishi's higher taxes. That again is proper conservatism, and I think she's got the character to lead the party and the nation. Liz Truss is the best candidate. That's what we're working for. She's a proper Eurosceptic. She'll deliver for the voters, and she believes in low taxation.
And she's a woman.
Well, there we are. I mean, is that an endorsement that you'd want, David?
I was thinking, actually, that they must have been paid by Liz Truss's opponents. I mean, it's just kind of. I mean, if I was to say what's not going to be kind of course, I caveated this before with my lack of understanding of Conservative MPs compared with other people's and of the Conservative constituency. But nevertheless, these are two endorsements I desperately wouldn't want. Both these people are daft. And they're obviously daft, and the voters think they're daft by and large. And I don't know that a large number of Conservative Party members, especially given what Danny just said, won't also think that they're a bit daft, i.e. not entirely serious and not entirely to be taken seriously. So in other words, Liz Truss is now the daft person's candidate.
Well,
what's good about that?
I think that is guilty of the thing that we talked about earlier. No, the truth is that both those people help to give Liz Truss something that she needs, which is a sort of stamp that she's really of the right when, there are a lot of reasons to argue that she isn't. And then the other thing that helps her is simply it helps anybody who fights Rishi Sunak, which is Jacob Rees-Mogg pressing on this idea that Rishi Sunak increased taxes, which he obviously did due to spending increases of Boris Johnson's, which Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's one of Boris Johnson's great enthusiasts, and Nadine Dorries presumably thought would have to be paid for somehow. Anyway, so it's slightly, it is ironic. I share your, they don't attract me to support a candidate, but they do attract some people, and therefore they from Liz Truss's point of view, they're absolutely endorsements worth having. Both, by the way, against not just for two reasons. One is she's got to get to 20 and then 30 members to get through to the second round. She's got to see off Priti Patel and Suella Braverman in order to do that, to be the leading candidate. These are pretty helpful. So I think that they're an important step forward for her.
So we're really talking around the margins, because the question I would have wanted to ask is whether or not they won't put other people off, either at this stage or on other stages. So
they might
I might think about Liz Truss, but if they like her, well, then she's not for me. And there are other candidates who are similar.
They will do, but they probably won't do on the bit of the party that she wants to bring over. That they will do more outside outside the party than they will in it. There's no question that in a leadership election, the simple idea the most right-wing candidate will definitely win, I don't think is correct. I always thought, even before Boris Johnson pulled out in 2016, that Theresa May stood a strong chance. David Cameron obviously beat David Davis. So it's not...
And actually, Boris Johnson, if you remove Brexit, was not a right-wing candidate.
No, and indeed,
his government has drifted that way a bit since because of who
it's obvious that
it's
obvious that there won't be that candidate in the last two either. So Jacob Rees-Mogg obviously realised that he and Priti Patel and Suella Braverman they couldn't themselves get through to the last round. So they've had to go behind another candidate. It is valuable to her. You're right, it will put some people off, and ultimately, actually, it's possible that. She'll position herself, it won't look realistic, and Rishi will look more authentic. A lot depends on who endorses him. I'm sure that he's got right-wing endorsers, and he'll need to have those in order, because there's quite a strong blast coming at him from the Daily Mail, for example, which is trying to suggest, as both James Cleverly absurdly and also Jacob Rees-Mogg have, that he's a left-wing chancellor. I mean, ironically, I really, really like Rishi. I'm very admiring of him, but he is definitely more free market, more low-tax orientated than I am. It's my one reservation, actually.
Well, actually, the criticism of him is that he wouldn't splurge spending unless it was being paid for. He wasn't behaving like the normal criticism of the criticism of him is that he wanted to balance the books.
Absolutely. So that was the issue. That was the issue between him and Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I think this just shows you. I mean, and this is part of the problem with the sheer levels of unreality about this discussion. And in a way, it's to be expected. We all know that first, in order to get to power, you have to have your party on your side. So you indulge the fantasies of party members on the one hand, and actually they have two electorates, MPs and then and the party. And then you have to turn to the country, and the country has a whole different set of preoccupations. They're not obsessed by the same things that the party is obsessed by. Famously, in the case of Labour, where very many more people voted in the Corbyn election and so on, they voted for a complete fantasy of what actually it was that they could achieve electorally. And unfortunately, Corbyn said, well, this is what I'm going to put before the country, because, of course, he couldn't do anything else, because that's all he was. That's all he'd been for years and years and years and years. Whereas, there's a big argument against Keir Starmer by sections of the left, which is you promised us you were going to keep on with Corbyn policies when we didn't vote for you in the leadership election. So actually you're a liar and a cheat and so on. To which you say, yeah, this is what people do.
That's what politics. That's politics. I do.
Well, that's what politics at that level is about. You reassure the party, and then you get to a position to face the country.
I think that is there a point, Danny, where there's a risk, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but in order to gain all of this support, that Liz Truss has either ceded positions or at least ceded platform to over the course of the longer campaign, she'll end up having to take positions which is not very. Is there a danger when she suddenly realises that she's the Nutters campaign? She's the Nutters candidate, or actually, she's basically now authorised Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg to keep going out and making outlandish and occasionally stupid stances, and she's now their candidate.
Well, she is, yes, but do not forget those people have got a base of support in the Conservative Party, where it might strike people who, it won't surprise listeners to know they're not exactly my people, but let's not make a mistake of analysis. They've got real support. Not only have they got real support in the Conservative Party, but they've got real support among Conservatives in the country as well, right? The thing is, as David said, that they I think more broadly they're ridiculous election losers, and so I think she might have their support in the short run, but regret it in the long run. Yeah.
And one of the things that we're probably keeping an eye out for, Danny, and actually the thing that might slightly electrify a campaign, which so far has been a little bit lacklustre, is some of the people who haven't, got very far on the endorsements front. It'd be quite exciting if one of them turned up at one of these launches, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think I'm hearing that it's quite possible that Grant Shapps will come out and support Rishi. The advantage of him doing that is that he was one of Boris's organisers, so he would possibly help Rishi with the you stab Boris in the back idea. I'm not sure beyond that he carries a lot of weight as a right. He's not thought of as necessarily as being on that in the party, that is, as being on the right. Funny enough, actually, I've found him quite an impressive minister. I know that and lots of people I think have agreed with that as a transport minister. I just disagree with his position on the Prime Minister.
David, I think you were laughing.
Oh, no. Actually, I've heard that Grant Shapps is supposed to be quite a good minister as well from completely different sources. And given my reluctance to admit such things, I think that says something. Whether or not his endorsement is worth anything, again, I completely. It's the thing that I try to work out in this is the candidates who have obviously put themselves in not because they expect to be leader, but because they think it will possibly get them a big job when the leader is elected. So they've got to decide the moment at which to get out of the race, and then who to endorse is always a kind of interesting moment. And the question about whether or not their endorsement then in any way carries their supporters with them, I'd have thought mostly they just don't. Once they're out, their supporters will just go where they will. They won't kind of say, "Oh, Kemi Badenoch says back, whoever it is, Liz Truss, so I'm going to do it," rather than Rishi Sunak. I don't think they're going to do that. So
it would be interesting.
It's not numbers really. It's just sort of. You're quite right. So Kemi Badenoch's not going to win the leadership of the Conservative Party, but she's clearly made a lot of progress in raising her profile, and that was obviously what she tried to do, and it's been very successful.
And actually, is there a point? I can't really remember if anyone's done this before, but could we see mid-August, Rishi Sunak announces Kemi Badenoch will be Home Secretary, Tom Tugendhat's Foreign Secretary, Grant Shapps is Chancellor, say, and that actually starts...
Or Transport Secretary.
Or still, surely he wants something better than that by now. And actually that starts looking like quite a formidable team while Liz Truss is out doing visits with Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Yeah, he could try to do that. I mean, some of the people Prime Minister in waiting, reluctant to do that. Because if you give away the positions that you do,
you might have promised them to somebody
else. And then you've also got to accommodate the other side of if somebody comes second, you've got to accommodate them. So I think it's particularly wise thing to do. But you could try and assemble a good team. Yeah.